4 winters had passed since Jack vanished into the Bitterroot Mountains, and every morning she still poured 2 cups of coffee. But then, one fog-laced dawn, a German shepherd stood at her porch not barking, not lost, just watching in his mouth. The glove Jack wore the day he disappeared. Some say it was just a dog. She believes it was an angel in fur, and what he led her to would rewrite everything she thought she knew about love, about loss, and about God. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt a sign from beyond, stay with us. This one might be yours. The early morning fog clung to the pines like breath held too long. In the quiet outskirts of Hamilton, a small town tucked against the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. Winter still owned the land, though spring whispered in the air with the occasional trill of a distant bird. The sky above was a dull pewter, heavy with clouds that hinted at snow, and the forest beyond Emma's cabin stood still. Statues of frost and bark, silent sentinels of secrets long buried. Emma Bennett stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee in hand the way she always did, one for herself and one for Jack. It had been 4 years since her husband had disappeared on what should have been a simple wildlife survey. 4 years since she last saw him leave in his forest green parka, his notebook in one pocket, and his gloves, those tan leather ones she had gifted him for Christmas, tucked in the other. She still brewed 2 cups every morning. Ritual habit, hope she no longer knew the difference. At 38, Emma wore her sorrow with the same ease she wore her flannel coats, layered, weathered, and silent. Her once auburn hair now held streaks of gray near the temples, tied back in a loose bun, as if time had pulled it taut. Her eyes, once green like the forest in bloom, now looked like faded moss, calm but weary. She had the calm resilience of a woman who'd had to bury her hope without a body to mourn. A biologist turned recluse, she now taught local ecology classes at the community college, and kept mostly to herself, save for the occasional visit from her elderly neighbor or the curious mailman with too many questions. This morning, as Emma set Jack's mug on the railing, something stirred at the edge of the woods. At first, she thought it was a deer. The way the shape moved low and steady across the snow-dusted ground suggested something careful and observant. But as it stepped closer, breaking through the mist like a ghost from her dreams, Emma's breath caught. It was a dog, large, muscular, with thick black and tan fur dusted in frost. A German shepherd, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, though his gait carried the weight of wisdom far older. His eyes were the color of old whiskey, sharp yet mournful, and they met hers with an intensity that felt almost human. Emma didn't move. The dog didn't bark. He just stood at the foot of her porch steps, head held high, tail still. And then she saw it, clutched delicately in his jaws, was a single tan leather glove, frayed at the cuff, stained with time. She dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the wood with a sharp crack, but she barely registered it. Her legs trembled as she stepped forward, one hesitant foot after another, the cold biting through her slippers. The dog didn't flinch as she approached. When she was close enough to touch him, he gently dropped the glove at her feet and sat down. Emma picked it up with shaking hands, her heart thrumming wildly in her chest. The stitching along the thumb, she remembered it. Jack had burned it slightly on the stove that winter they camped in Glacier Park. She had sewn it back for him with blue thread, the same thread that now frayed again with age. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She turned back toward the house. "Come on, boy," she said softly, unsure why the words felt so natural, like a whisper from some memory not her own. The dog followed without hesitation, paws thumping against the wood as he stepped into her kitchen. Inside, the warmth from the old stone fireplace softened the morning chill. Emma knelt down, examining the dog more closely. His coat was thick, a little matted in places, with small burrs tangled around his haunches. A few old scars lined his left flank, reminders of encounters she could only imagine. Around his neck, a weathered leather collar sat snug, but the tags were long gone. "You've been through something," she murmured. The dog whined softly, pressing his head into her hand. Emma felt a lump rising in her throat. She poured him a bowl of water, and he lapped it up gratefully, but not frantically. He was hungry, but not starving. Lost, but not desperate. Purposeful, as if he had come with intent. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in her living room chair, the glove in her lap, and the dog curled at her feet. Snow began to fall again, sometime past midnight, dusting the porch and the trees in new silence. Emma lit the old oil lamp by the window and wrote in her journal for the first time in months. Day was. The dog brought me Jack's glove. Either this is the start of madness, or the beginning of something else. I named him Ranger. He looks like one. By dawn, the fog had lifted slightly, and the mountains wore a fresh coat of white. Emma knew this was no ordinary visit. This dog, this Ranger, was not just a stray. The next morning, frost veined the windows like nature's handwriting, and the forest outside shimmered in silence under a pale sky. Emma stood by her kitchen sink, the glove still on the table, now sealed in a plastic bag. Ranger sat near the door, alert, but calm, his eyes flicking to her every few seconds as if waiting for a signal. There was something watchful in him, something more than instinct, a quiet awareness, a readiness. Emma placed the glove in her canvas tote alongside a notepad and a small evidence envelope, then grabbed her coat keys and phone. She knew someone in town who might be able to help a retired forensic tech who occasionally ran tests for the sheriff's office. The man had a small lab set up in his garage, cluttered but surprisingly thorough. As they drove down the winding road into town, Ranger rode in the back of the Jeep, head poking out the open window nose, twitching in the cold air. Emma stole glances at him through the rearview mirror. The way he watched the landscape pass by, silent, and still felt almost like recognition, like memory. They stopped at the edge of town at a modest white house, with an American flag flapping softly on the porch. The man who answered the door was in his 60s, lean with sharp cheekbones, and wore a threadbare flannel tucked into faded jeans. His name was Tom Delaney, a former lab technician for the county with salt and pepper hair tied back into a ponytail, and an old scar beneath his left eye, a souvenir from a car wreck that had taken the mobility of 2 fingers on his right hand. Tom had always been kind to Emma, offering quiet support after Jack's disappearance. He welcomed her in with a nod and a simple, "You look tired, Em." She handed him the bagged glove, her voice low. "I need to know if there's anything unusual. Blood dirt. Anything." Tom said he'd need a few days, but agreed to rush it. He promised to call as soon as he had results. Meanwhile, back on the outskirts of town, Lily Grant, a curious 12-year-old girl with unruly brown curls and oversized glasses, sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor with colored pencils scattered around her. Her small room smelled faintly of pine needles and glue. On the bed was a stack of journals, most of them belonging to her grandmother who used to work as a forest trail guide decades ago. Lily lived in the house across the field from Emma's cabin. She was short for her age, always scribbling notes in her forest notebook or mapping the woods on a huge roll of butcher paper she kept hidden beneath her bed. She had a mind for patterns and paths, a natural cartographer in training. And ever since Ranger appeared, she'd been watching Emma's house with growing fascination. She remembered something her grandmother once said during a thunderstorm. "There's a dog in those woods who doesn't belong to anyone, or maybe he belongs to everyone. Some folks call him the ghost shepherd." Lily had giggled back then, but now seeing that same dog trotting alongside Emma had stirred her imagination in ways she couldn't explain. That afternoon, Lily pulled her grandmother's old topographical maps from the closet and began cross-referencing them with what she remembered from her own hikes. She marked a few points with red stars, places where her grandmother used to say the air hummed funny, especially near an abandoned mine just past Deadwood Hollow. 2 days later, Tom called. His voice was quiet but not uncertain. "Emma, there are traces of blood on the glove. Dried and old. But here's what's strange. There are particulates embedded in the leather silicate dust and rare earth mineral traces, lanthanum neodymium. Not something you just find lying around, unless you're near certain industrial zones." Emma frowned. "Like a mine, exactly," Tom said. "There's only one place in this county I can think of with that signature, the old Larkspur mine west of the ridge. Closed in the late 90s, been off limits for years. You'd need clearance or a death wish to go poking around." As she ended the call, a chill ran down her spine. That mine had been the focus of a county-wide debate just months before Jack disappeared. He had mentioned it briefly, mostly frustration that the data surrounding its environmental impact had been sealed, but he had never said he was going there. Later that night, as Emma stood on her porch, staring into the pine-dark forest, Ranger let out a soft growl and stepped forward. His ears perked, eyes fixed on the tree line. Emma followed his gaze. From behind a bush, a small figure stepped out, hesitant but not afraid. It was Lily. Emma was surprised but not alarmed. "Hey there," she said gently. "Everything okay?" Lily held up a folded paper in both hands. "I made you something. A map. I think your dog is trying to tell you something." Emma looked at her eyebrows raised. Lily quickly added, "I know he's not yours exactly, but I saw him. I think he's the same one from Grandma's stories." Emma knelt to Lily's level, her voice warm but serious. "How long have you been watching us?" "Just since he showed up. I didn't mean to spy, I just—" She looked down. "I think he's special. I've been keeping track of places in the woods. Places Grandma called quiet zones, like the woods were holding something back." Emma took the map. It was surprisingly detailed with terrain contours, old ranger posts, even hand-drawn symbols that Lily had created to mark weird stuff. One red X marked the exact location where Jack's Jeep had been found 4 years ago. "You marked this?" Emma asked. "Yeah, it's not on the new maps. But I found the tire marks once, they're still faint." Emma stood, her thoughts racing. She glanced down at Ranger, who was now watching Lily with his tail thumping softly against the porch floor. Then she looked back at the map, feeling the slow rise of something ancient and powerful. Not fear, not quite hope, but direction. The trail narrowed as the pines grew denser, their dark trunks forming natural walls on either side of Emma and Ranger. They had been hiking for nearly 2 hours, guided not by GPS, which had failed just beyond the first ridge, but by Ranger's unwavering instinct and Lily's hand-drawn map. The silence in this part of the Bitterroot was unnatural. Even the usual bird calls had faded, replaced by the soft crunch of boots on old needles and the occasional snap of a frost-weakened twig. The air changed as they crossed a shallow ravine. The cold felt different, heavier, metallic, like the breath of something sleeping beneath the earth. Emma paused to check her phone again. No signal. Her GPS app continued spinning, unable to locate satellites, but Ranger kept moving tail low, but steady his nose, skimming the ground as if following a scent no human could detect. They came upon a clearing ringed with laurel and snowberry. At its center lay a half-buried fire pit, now filled with damp leaves and pine cones. Emma's breath caught when she saw the faint imprint of boot prints, half-faded but unmistakably human. Ranger whined softly and trotted to the base of a nearby cedar tree. He began pawing at the ground, dislodging old needles and revealing something beneath. Emma knelt beside him. It was a compass, old and worn with a leather strap still attached. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. The initials, J.B. were scratched faintly into the metal back. She opened the casing and the needles spun erratically before jerking violently toward north. It was Jack's. She remembered the day he'd found it in a second-hand shop, excited like a kid, reliable as the North Star, he'd joked. A rush of memories swept over her, the two of them sitting by a campfire. Jack showing her how to read animal tracks, how to tell the difference between elk and deer droppings, the way he always carried that compass clipped to his belt like it was a talisman. She could almost hear his voice again, calm and playful, teaching her how to use bark patterns to judge tree age or spot a hidden trail by disturbed moss. It was the language of the forest, and Jack had spoken it fluently. Emma blinked back tears and looked at Ranger. "You brought me here for this, didn't you?" she whispered. He nudged her gently, then turned back toward the shadows beyond the clearing. Back in town, Lily sat on the back porch of her house, legs swinging as she peeled a clementine, her brow furrowed. Her grandmother, Margaret Grant, sat nearby in a worn rocking chair knitting something from thick gray yarn. Margaret was a sturdy woman in her late 70s with deep smile lines and the kind of voice that could calm or command depending on how it was used. Her hair, once black, was now white and pulled back in a tight bun. She had worked as a wilderness guide until a hiking injury left her with a permanent limp and a tendency to walk with a cane. Lily had always admired her grandmother's strength, the way she could name every plant in the garden, or predict storms better than any app. But lately, there were gaps in her stories, vague references to places not safe anymore, and a reluctance to talk about the Larkspur mine, which Lily knew had something to do with Jack's disappearance. "Grandma," Lily said suddenly, "do you remember the man who came by last year asking about the mining tunnels?" Margaret's hands stilled. Her needles paused mid-stitch. "What man?" "The tall one with the fancy car. I saw you talking to him. You told him something. Then you burned that old map." Margaret's jaw clenched. "That was nothing you needed to worry about. But it's about the mine, isn't it? About what's in there." Her grandmother stood slowly using her cane to steady herself. "Some things, Lily, are buried for a reason. But what if someone's still down there?" Margaret looked away toward the horizon where the trees met the sky, her eyes clouded with something between fear and regret. "Then, I pray they find their way out." Meanwhile, in the forest, Emma and Ranger followed a narrow game trail that twisted between ancient firs. The further they went, the more the ground seemed to pulse. Not literally, but in that unsettling way pressure builds before a storm. Birds avoided the area. Even the squirrels had vanished. She glanced at the compass again. The needle was shaking, spinning, then jerking to the side like it was trying to escape the casing. They crested a hill, and there it was, a rusted metal sign half buried under moss and dirt. The words Larkspur, Access Route B, were barely visible beneath decades of corrosion. Emma stared at it, heart hammering. Jack had mentioned Larkspur once. Just once. He said he didn't trust the reports, that something about the land readings didn't make sense. And then he'd gone quiet. Ranger barked once, not loud but urgent. He ran ahead toward a rock outcrop veiled in vines. Emma followed, pushing aside brush to reveal an entrance. Not a cave, a shaft, reinforced with crumbling wood beams and half covered by a fallen tree. It looked like no one had stepped inside for decades, but the ground told a different story. Footprints, some small and recent, others faded with age. Ranger sniffed the entrance, then sat waiting. Emma crouched and shined her flashlight inside. A tunnel sloped downward into darkness. Her heart pounded as she reached into her pack for a chalk stick and made a mark on the stone. "We'll come back," she said to Ranger. "We're not doing this alone." As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the trees, Emma turned back toward the trail compass and hand glove in her pack and Ranger at her side. Somewhere ahead lay answers, and somewhere in the town behind, a young girl and an old woman sat with secrets that refused to stay buried. The morning sun bled gold through the forest canopy, but the warmth never quite touched the ground. The woods around Larkspur were still and listening, as if waiting for someone to speak. The first truth. Emma stood before the hidden shaft entrance they had discovered the day before, her hiking boots already dusted with earth, her fingers gloved and trembling slightly as she reached into her backpack. Ranger stood beside her ears, perked tail, still his body radiating an energy that wasn't fear, but something more akin to recognition. She had returned as promised, this time with climbing gear, a stronger flashlight and a mind fortified by resolve. But before descending into the dark, she took one last look around, scanning the landscape for anything that might explain why her husband had vanished without a trace. It was then that Ranger veered slightly off path, nose twitching, weaving through the trees, until he stopped at an old cedar split down the middle by lightning. Years ago, a hollow sat at the base, partially obscured by moss and decaying leaves. Emma followed, curious, crouching to clear the debris. Her hand brushed something solid canvas. She tugged gently, revealing a weathered field notebook wrapped in waxed cloth. The initials J.B. were faint but unmistakable on the corner. She exhaled sharply, chest tightening. It was Jack's. Opening the notebook, she found dense pages filled with handwriting she knew better than her own, tight, slanted script, dotted with scientific diagrams, mineral analyses, and observational notes. But what chilled her were the final entries. One page had been earmarked with a flattened spruce needle. The ink was slightly smudged but still legible. The frequencies spiked near the fault lines. Not natural low-band vibrations. Dogs react, especially Ranger, not just fear recognition. Another page found evidence of a closed biosphere. Fungal colonies growing in complete darkness. Independent nutrient cycles. This isn't just geology, it's life. Isolated, preserved. Possibly ancient. Emma's heart thudded. Jack hadn't just gone on a wildlife survey. He had stumbled into something deeper, literally and figuratively. Ranger barked once, sharp and short, as if to confirm what she was thinking. The forest itself seemed to shift with the sound, the wind picking up in sudden gusts. Emma packed the journal carefully and began marking a trail around the shaft entrance, deciding to explore later that evening, when shadows would mask her from unwanted eyes. She had learned to move quietly. Someone had tried to bury this place. Someone might still be watching. Meanwhile, in Lily's room, old cassette tapes littered the floor like relics from another age. Her fingers were smudged with graphite from tracing maps the night before, but her attention was fixed on the battered portable tape player humming on her desk. The voice that crackled through the static was faint, deep, and unmistakably Jack Bennett's. Discovered something deeper than expected. Soil anomalies, consistent patterns, but then the sound, the recording fuzzed, then sharpened. Can't explain the resonance. Heard at 17, 4 km/h. Ranger reacts before any seismic shifts. Could be pressure changes, could be more. Lily leaned closer, eyes wide. She glanced at the label on the tape. Survey notes. October. A red star had been drawn in the corner. She quickly rewound and played the section again, confirming what she heard. The sound Jack described wasn't just geological. It had rhythm, cadence, something almost intentional. Grandma, she called, rushing out to the kitchen where Margaret was peeling apples for a pie. Her hands, though aged, moved with confidence. Margaret looked up. "What is it, Lily? You said Jack was just a hiker, but he wasn't. He was recording things down there, sounds strange ones. And Ranger, he reacted? I think he still does." Margaret's face hardened slightly, but then she sighed. "You're too sharp for your own good girl." "Sit down," Lily obeyed the tape, still clutched in her hands. Margaret set the knife down and wiped her hands. Jack came to me once, before he disappeared. He didn't talk much, but he asked about the old Larkspur tunnels. Not the ones on the maps, the ones from before the collapse in '83. Said he was following something deep, deeper than rock. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because he asked me not to. Said it could change everything. And maybe I believed him. Back in the forest. Emma returned to her cabin to analyze the journal in peace. She spread it across the table, Ranger watching from the rug like a silent guardian. The entries were meticulous, obsessive in places. Jack had been close to something, maybe even feared it, but he hadn't stopped. He believed it was important. Her eyes caught a sketch near the back of the notebook, concentric circles radiating from a fissure marked with stars. At the bottom of the page was a short note. If found, follow the sound. That night, Lily appeared at her doorstep with the tape player in hand. "You need to hear this," she said, and played Jack's voice for Emma. When the low-frequency tone hummed through the room, Ranger's ears snapped forward. He growled, not with fear, but focus. He walked to the speaker, sniffed it, and let out a low, almost mournful whine. Emma looked at Lily, then at the dog, then back at the journal. The sound she whispered, he still remembers. Lily nodded wide-eyed. "So do I." The path narrowed as Emma and Ranger ascended the forested slopes beyond the Larkspur clearing. The air felt older here, denser somehow, as if it had been holding its breath for decades. The trees loomed taller, the pines straighter and darker, and every step they took stirred the scent of ancient bark and damp moss. This wasn't a place hikers stumbled across. It was one you were led to, and today Ranger led with purpose. Emma carried Jack's journal in her pack, nestled between a thermos of tea and Lily's tape recorder. The deeper she went, the more she believed that Jack hadn't vanished by accident. He'd found something buried beneath the forest, waiting to be uncovered or forgotten forever. They reached a split in the trail, marked only by an old rusted horseshoe nailed into a crooked birch. Ranger turned left without hesitation. Emma followed, ducking beneath fallen branches until the trees opened up to a clearing, dotted with the remains of a long-abandoned firewatch cabin. Leaning against the porch post, pipe in hand and eyes as sharp as broken glass, was Walter Keene, a man carved from the same wood as the forest around him. In his early 70s, but still built like a lumberjack, Walter had a long white beard braided at the end, deep crow's feet etched into his leathery skin, and a thick wool coat with patches of duct tape where the seams had failed. He had worked as a wilderness ranger for over 40 years before retiring to this isolated outpost near the mountain ridge. Most folks said he preferred trees to people, and they weren't wrong. When he spotted Ranger, his brows lifted with recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter muttered, stepping forward, the boards creaking under his boots. "That's Jack's dog." Emma's breath caught. You knew Jack." Walter nodded slowly, knew him. He came up this way a few times. Quiet man, but sharp eyes like a hawk. Questions like a scientist. Said he was tracking anomalies in the soil and strange vibrations. Brought that dog with him every time Emma stepped closer. Her heart hammering. Did he say what he was looking for? Walter squinted, then leaned on his cane. Didn't share everything, but I got the sense he wasn't here for flora and fauna. He talked about energy readings, said the land felt wrong. Like it was humming, but no one could hear it unless you really listened. He motioned for her to sit on the porch bench. Ranger lay at her feet, his eyes never leaving Walter's face. "There've been disappearances," Walter continued. "Not just Jack. Hikers, hunters, the kind that don't leave prints, gear, or bones behind. Some say they got lost. Others say the mountain takes what it wants." Emma opened her pack and handed him the journal. Walter flipped through it, slowly nodding. He found the fault lines, the underground networks I told him to stay clear of the southern ridge near Devil's Backbone. Too unstable, but he didn't listen. Emma swallowed hard. Do you think he's still alive? Walter looked out at the trees for a long moment before answering. I think if anyone could survive in those tunnels, it was Jack Bennett. But if he is, he's deeper than any search team's gone before. You'd need a tracker. Someone who knows the land and the sounds it makes when it's hiding something. As if on cue, Ranger barked once, sharp and low. Walter's lips twitched upward. Looks like you've already got the best guide there is. Later that afternoon, Emma returned to the cabin with a mind spinning like the compass Jack had left behind. She replayed Walter's words over and over. Energy fields, missing people. Warnings about the ridge. It all pointed toward a single conclusion. Jack had gone below to investigate something extraordinary, and Ranger knew where. Meanwhile, back in town, Lily sat at the library's microfilm machine. Flipping through local archives with growing frustration, she had convinced the elderly librarian, Mrs. Bernadine Bertie Combs, to let her search records that weren't digitized. Bertie was a spry woman in her late 80s with cloud-white hair tucked into a tight bun and large round glasses that made her eyes appear twice their actual size. She had been a schoolteacher before retirement and still spoke with the clipped authority of someone used to quiet classrooms. Be gentle with those reels, Bertie warned. They're older than both of us combined. I'm looking for old mining maps, Lily explained. And any articles about cave-ins or weird seismic stuff from the 80s or 90s. Bertie raised an eyebrow. You mean the Larkspur files? Most of those were sealed after the big accident. Lily nodded. Exactly. That's the one. After some digging, they found an article from 1983 detailing an unsolved collapse deep in the mine's uncharted lower shaft. 3 workers had vanished. The company blamed unstable rock and quietly shut the site down. But the headline stuck with Lily last sound was a humming survivor's report. Odd vibrations before collapse. She took a picture and rushed home. The pieces were aligning. Jack hadn't been chasing a theory. He had proof, and now so did she. That night, as the wind howled through the trees, Emma sat beside the fire. Walter's warnings echoing in her mind. She ran her fingers over the worn leather of Jack's journal, the type recorder resting beside her, and the compass always twitching, spinning now in small frantic jerks. Ranger sat by the door, ears perked. He growled softly, then turned his head toward the woods. Emma stood slowly. You hear it too, don't you? She whispered. Outside, the forest wasn't silent anymore. Something was humming. The wind carried a sharp chill as Emma followed Ranger along a hidden deer trail, snaking through the trees. The forest had changed. It wasn't just the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the undergrowth. It was the feeling, the quiet pressure of something just beneath the surface. Like the hum of an old generator deep underground vibrating up through stone and root. Ranger moved with precision, his nose close to the earth, tail low posture alert. He wasn't merely sniffing out a trail, he was guiding, as if recalling steps he'd once taken with someone else. Emma kept pace behind him, her pack heavy with gear, Jack's journal water rope and a backup flashlight. The old compass from Jack's pocket, which she'd started to wear around her neck, twitched erratically against her chest, with each step closer to the unknown. They reached a narrow crevice hidden by a fallen tree, and thick bramble barely visible unless one knew where to look. Ranger pushed forward, and Emma followed, forcing her way through with scraped arms and snagged sleeves. What lay beyond took her breath. The rock wall yawned into a dark chasm. A shallow overhang shielded a narrow entryway into the mountain. Moisture dripped from the stone like sweat from some slumbering giant. Moss clung to the walls, and the scent of damp mineral and deep soil hung heavy in the air. A few yards inside, Emma froze. Footprints. Human, recent and not hers. They circled a makeshift campsite, a compact tent low to the ground, its seams still taut. A small camp stove, barely cooled, sat beside an open journal filled with numbers and hastily drawn maps. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, but not long ago Ranger sniffed around the edge of the tent, then growled low. Emma crouched and touched the ground. Still warm. Someone was watching this place, or guarding it. She was reaching for the journal when she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. Emma spun heart-pounding, only to find herself face to face with Lily, bundled in a too-big hoodie and backpack, cheeks flushed from the cold eyes blazing with urgency. Standing a step behind her was Margaret, leaning heavily on her cane, breathing hard from the hike. Emma blinked. "What are you doing here?" Lily held up a shaky hand. "We had to come." Grandma said, "He's back." The man from before. Emma stood, heart still racing. What man? Margaret stepped forward. Her posture was stiff, but her voice was firm. "A few years ago, a man came to me asking about the Larkspur tunnels, said he was with a geological research firm. But he wasn't. He was looking for something. Not mining rights information about Jack. About the readings Jack was chasing." Emma felt her stomach tighten, and now he's returned. "He came by the house," Margaret said grimly. "Didn't say who he was, but asked if I still had those old maps. Asked if I'd seen you lately. I didn't like the way he looked at Lily." Emma clenched her jaw. "He knows we're getting close." Lily dug into her pack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Another hand-drawn map. Grandma said she remembered a second entrance near the riverbed, the kind the miners used to bring in supplies. "It's probably sealed off, but maybe we can use it if we have to leave fast." Emma nodded. She turned to Ranger, who was standing at the cave entrance tail, stiff head slightly tilted, as though hearing something none of them could. "We won't stay long," Emma said. "Just a little deeper. We need to know what Jack found." Lily opened her mouth to object, but Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let her go. She's come this far. Just come back." Emma took one last look at the fading light, then stepped inside the mouth of the earth. The air was colder here, thick and unmoving. The cave tunnel sloped gently at first, then dipped steeply downward. The beam of her flashlight caught fragments of old mining equipment, half buried in dust. Rusted picks, splintered crates, coiled cables. At one turn she passed a wooden beam etched with initials, TM plus JB. She paused. Jack and Thomas Mendez, his old colleague. She hadn't heard from Thomas in years. Further down, Ranger stopped and stared at the wall. Emma moved closer. A strange symbol had been painted there, a crude spiral inside a square. It was fresh. She reached out to touch it, but Ranger growled again, not in warning, but like a dog trying to speak. Then he turned and padded deeper into the dark, back above ground. Margaret watched the trees with narrowed eyes. She shifted her weight and leaned close to Lily. "We're not alone," she whispered. Moments later, a dark SUV rolled slowly up the ridgy road, headlights off. A man stepped out, tall, lean mid-40s, with short-cropped black hair and a smooth tan coat. His face was clean-shaven, but something about the way he moved was sharp, predatory. He knocked once on a tree trunk, then spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "Target is active. We may have movement in the shaft." Margaret tensed. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the way he looked at the woods, like he owned them. The tunnel tightened as Emma descended deeper into the mountain, the stone walls closing in like the pages of a book not meant to be read. Her flashlight flickered briefly before steadying again, its narrow beam casting shadows that danced over decades-old support beams and rusty rails embedded in the floor. Ranger walked just ahead, his paws silent against the dust-covered ground, his body tense but sure. He knew this path. The deeper they went, the louder the humming became, not in her ears but in her bones, a low, rhythmic vibration like the heartbeat of something vast and hidden. Emma pressed her palm against the cold wall. It vibrated ever so slightly, and she knew then that this place was alive in some way. No textbook could explain. They reached a fork. One path sloped gently down into what appeared to be a collapsed chamber, the air thick with moisture. The other veered sharply to the right toward a narrow corridor where Emma spotted something metallic glinting under the beam of her light. It was a harness clip marked with Jack's initials. She took a step forward, and a voice echoed through the tunnel, smooth and casual like oil sliding across a blade. Looking for something. Dr. Bennett. Emma froze. Ranger growled low and guttural. Body tensed like a bowstring. The figure that emerged from the shadows wore a tailored field jacket, boots too clean for cave work, and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Mason Hale, early 40s, lean-tanned with angular features and salt-and-pepper hair slicked back, a former consultant for a multinational energy firm that had once partnered with Jack's research. She'd seen him once at a conference back when Jack still spoke at conferences. Mason held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt you, just here for what you found." Emma's voice was low steady. "You mean the USB bingo." He stepped closer. "You think Jack disappeared because of an accident. He ran, took sensitive data from our project and vanished. That drive belongs to my company." Emma's hand tightened around the flashlight. Jack was trying to protect something. He found something in these tunnels, something alive. Mason laughed softly. Romantic. But the truth is simpler. He was going to blow the whistle on proprietary energy research. He threatened us. He had to be contained. Ranger barked, snapping the air like a gunshot. Mason stepped back slightly. "Easy, dog. We all know how protective you are." A noise echoed behind them, soft at first, then unmistakable. Another figure stepped into view, Peter Calderon, a seasoned search and rescue officer in his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin, and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had carried too many people out of these woods. He wore a patched SR jacket and a tactical light glowed on his chest harness. Emma almost collapsed in relief. "Peter, I got your signal," he said, raising a hand. "Thanks to Lily. She and your neighbor used the old observatory's comm tower. Laser pulse straight to my team's tracker." "Clever kid," Mason's expression soured. "Well, this complicates things." Peter moved forward, eyes never leaving Mason. "You're trespassing on federal land, and you're interfering with an ongoing investigation. I'm retrieving stolen property," Mason snapped. Peter unholstered a sidearm but kept it lowered. "You're leaving now." Behind them, footsteps echoed. 2 more members of the SAR team arrived, both in climbing harnesses and helmets, weapons holstered but visible. The leader, a woman named Rachel Monroe, stepped forward. Rachel was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled into a tight braid, freckles dusting her sharp cheekbones, and a no-nonsense gaze that could stop arguments before they began. She had a reputation for leading some of the region's most dangerous rescues, and didn't tolerate interference from outsiders. She nodded to Emma with calm authority. "You okay, Dr. Bennett?" Emma slipped the USB from her coat pocket and held it up. "This drive holds the truth about what Jack found." "You're not getting it." Ranger barked again, lunging just as Mason reached into his coat. He wasn't fast enough. Ranger knocked him to the ground with a thud that echoed through the chamber. The SAR team moved quickly, securing Mason and radioing for backup extraction. Peter approached Emma, his voice low. "Is this what he died for?" Emma shook her head. "He's not dead, not yet. And this isn't just science, it's a message, a warning." Peter looked at Ranger, who stood over Mason with quiet fury in his eyes, then back at Emma. "Then let's finish this." As they secured Mason and prepared to move out, Lily's voice crackled over Peter's comlink, somehow patching through a signal bounce via the observatory tower. "Did it work? Is Emma okay?" Peter smiled faintly. "She's more than okay. She's ready." The team began to ascend, Emma gripping the USB and Jack's compass. Somewhere deeper in these tunnels was the truth, and possibly Jack. She wasn't going to stop now. The deeper they descended, the more the cave seemed to breathe. The air was thick, but not stale. Alive, with moisture pulsing gently with each step they took. Emma gripped her flashlight tighter as the group moved carefully through the narrowing tunnel. Peter and Rachel led the way, with Ranger trotting ahead, ears pricked, body alert. His tail never wagged. He was focused, every muscle tuned to something only he could hear. Emma's heart beat so hard it echoed in her ears. Each footfall felt like crossing an invisible line between memory and reality. Jack was here. She could feel it not just in her bones, but in the way Ranger moved faster now, as if every step brought him closer to home. The tunnel opened into a massive subterranean chamber. Gasps escaped from the search team as they swept their lights across the cavern. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an ethereal blue glow. Giant crystalline formations jutted from the floor like frozen waves. Pools of water shimmered beneath the light, some glowing faintly, others perfectly still. And at the far side, huddled near a series of improvised solar lamps and weathered camping gear, was a figure. Thin, bearded, his once dark hair now streaked with silver. Jack. Bennett turned toward the light, shielding his eyes. His face was lean eyes, sunken but alert. His clothes were patched and faded hands calloused yet steady. His voice was hoarse but unmistakable. "Emma." She ran, nearly tripping over the uneven ground. Ranger reached him first, whining tail, trembling. Jack dropped to his knees and embraced the dog, tears streaking down his face, his fingers buried in Ranger's thick fur. "You found her," he whispered. Emma dropped beside them, breathless. "I told you I'd find you," she said, voice shaking. 4 years. Jack. He pulled her close, and for a long time they just stayed there, lost in the rhythm of heartbeats and breath of presence rediscovered. When they finally pulled apart, he touched her face gently, as if not believing she was real. "I thought I was out of time," he murmured. But Ranger, he never gave up. Rachel gave them space, quietly signaling the others to sweep the area for safety. Peter approached with cautious steps, eyes scanning Jack's setup. A makeshift lab sat tucked against the wall, field journals, soil samples, even a small microscope powered by solar cells. "You've been working," Peter said quietly. Jack nodded. "Had to do something with my mind. I found something down here, Peter. A self-sustaining ecosystem. Independent nutrient cycles. No sunlight, no surface interference. These fungi, they're processing minerals in ways we've never seen." He motioned toward a cluster of glowing spores pulsing near the cavern floor, and the vibrations. They're not just geological, they're rhythmic, structured like a natural code. Emma pulled the USB from her pocket. "We have your data, we're going to get it out. Safely, legally." Jack's eyes widened. Then it wasn't for nothing. Outside, the SAR team secured the site. A second rescue group had arrived above ground, coordinated by Lily, who waited anxiously at the forest line with Margaret and Rachel's team. When the extraction team radioed that Jack had been found alive, Lily dropped to her knees in the grass, overcome with emotion. He emerged hours later, blinking against the sunset. Ranger beside him, his arm around Emma's shoulders. Lily ran forward and hugged them both. Jack smiled at her eyes, full of gratitude. "You must be Lily," he said. "I've heard about you. You better have." Lily grinned through tears. "I did half the work." They laughed awkwardly at first, then with genuine release. The storm had passed. The air was still. The forest no longer felt like it was hiding secrets. It felt peaceful. In the days that followed, Mason Hale and several others were arrested under federal charges: corporate espionage, obstruction, attempted abduction. The mountain, once guarded by silence, now echoed with truth. Jack's findings were turned over to the University of Montana and an independent environmental research board. The underground biosphere became a protected site. His discoveries, once buried beneath layers of corporate greed and stone, were now peer-reviewed, published, and respected. As for Ranger, he became something more than a dog. He became a symbol. Journalists dubbed him the Sentinel of Larkspur. But to Emma, Jack, and Lily, he was simply family. A year later, they sat on the back porch of their cabin as the sun sank behind the trees. Jack's beard was trimmed. Now, his weight healthier, though he still carried the limp of years underground. Emma rested against him, a cup of coffee in hand. Lily lay sprawled on the porch swing, sketching crystal formations from memory. Ranger snored softly at their feet. Muzzle. Gray eyes half closed, but always listening. "You know," Jack said. "I thought the mountain had taken everything from me." Emma looked up at him. "But it gave you back to us." He smiled. "No, you brought me back." As the wind stirred the pines and the sky turned lavender, Ranger lifted his head. He looked toward the woods one last time, as if listening for the hum that had once called them below. Hearing nothing, he lowered his head again. They were home. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunderbolts from the sky, but quiet footsteps in the dark, a loyal heart that never stops searching, a voice that echoes through the silence, a dog that waits by the door long after the world has given up. Jack survived not just because of science or skill, but because of something deeper: faith. Faith in love, in memory, in the whisper of God through the trees. Ranger was not just a dog. He was a divine reminder that no one is truly lost when love still remembers. In our daily lives, we all face moments when we feel buried beneath fear, grief, or unanswered prayers. But just like Emma, we must keep listening, keep walking, and keep believing. Because God often works through the unexpected, the quiet, the four-legged angels He sends our way. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles still happen. Comment below if you believe love can bring us back from the darkest places. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, hope, and the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. And may God bless every soul who watches this. If you believe in the power of love and loyalty, type Amen in the comments.